Welcome back to One Piece Explained. We just got a ton of news and casting details surrounding the second season of the One Piece live action, and I've been dying to break it all down, so let's get right into it. But real quick, if you're new to the channel and want to stay up to date with all things live action, be sure to subscribe. That said, let's talk about this news. This week kicked off with a tease from the official accounts featuring Oda's iconic fish head avatar, and the very next morning, we got a full announcement from Oda himself. In it, he talks about how production has started on the next season of the live action, how Netflix and Tomorrow Studios have pledged to not move forward without his approval, just as we learned with season 1, and his overall excitement for everything to come. He also briefly highlighted how we'll see some of the real-world inspirations for the settings and characters throughout this arc, but let's get right into what may be the most surprising or exciting part of this message, being which arcs we can expect to see in this season. It looks like we'll be getting all of Logtown, Reverse Mountain, Whiskey Peak, Little Garden, all of which are coming to a climax at Drum Island. Now, given the casting of Smoker and Tashigi, the final scene at the end of season 1, and various leaked production photos and promotional images, we were fairly certain that we'd be getting Logtown in this season. Reverse Mountain was also suspected after some very interesting production photos had leaked, and all but confirmed with the casting of Crocus and Mr. 9, who, along with the casting for Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, heavily suggested that we would be getting Whiskey Peak as well. Little Garden was locked in with the casting of Dory, Brogy, and Mr. 3 after getting that fun teaser earlier this year with Usopp's birthday, April 1st. And Drum Island was pretty much guaranteed ever since we had learned that Chopper was joining the crew in this season, and the casting of Walpole and Dalton definitely confirmed that earlier this summer. After that initial batch of casting news in June, the big topic of discussion was whether or not there were going to be any more characters for Alabasta, with many holding out hope. But as it turns out, Drum is where we'll be leaving off. Now, what does that mean for the rest of the saga? I suppose everyone's first thought is that Alabasta would be pushed off to season 3, which is completely possible and probably the most likely outcome at this point. Given the show's decision to take their time with adapting these critical parts of the story, I can definitely see 8 episodes being dedicated to telling Alabasta right, and I'm genuinely excited for them to be able to flesh out this saga and tell a good story, without rushing through the emotional and climactic beats like they did in season 1. That said, I don't necessarily know if they need a full 8 episodes to do so, in which case, what would the rest of the season be? It wouldn't quite make sense to start getting into the following saga with the Jaya arc, since it feeds so well by itself into Skypiea. This makes me wonder if the rest of Alabasta won't necessarily be part of a 3rd season, but instead a second part to season 2. Now, I've talked at length about this idea in previous season 2 news breakdowns, so check those out if you're interested, but basically, there's been some reason to speculate that this next installment of the live action series may not just be a typical season. For one, while Oda and the team working on the series have used the phrase season 2, Netflix themselves seems to be a bit more peculiar with their language. When looking through the listings for various Netflix shows that have been renewed for more episodes, they all refer to a new season, except 2, Sandman and One Piece. I've mentioned on the channel before how the Sandman series has explicitly strayed away from releasing episodes via season, but instead choosing to drop in batches that are more akin to volumes, and there's some chance that this is the case for One Piece as well. Netflix refers to the next installment of our beloved live action as a new adventure, which more accurately describes how the series progresses, as story arcs tend to be tied to new islands and explorations rather than solely mapping to narrative beats. There could be some chance that we get another batch of episodes covering the Alabasta arc not too long after we get our next installment going up through Drum. This could also give more rationale behind the words of Rashad Mayweather, the actor who played Patty in season 1, who recently gave an interview in which he said they were filming 2 seasons back to back. He later rescinded his comments and said he misspoke, which is totally reasonable. However, some people still wondered why he would even mention something like that in the first place if there wasn't any truth behind it. Now, it's unlikely that an additional season would be filmed after the one currently in production, especially since there has not been any registrations that we know of hinting toward a 3rd season. But it's not impossible for them to work on a second part of the current season. Perhaps that's what was being referred to in that interview. At the end of the day, this is all still speculation done in good fun, so take this all with a grain of salt, but do keep it in the back of your mind. Whatever ends up happening, I'm just thrilled that they're taking their time with the series to do it justice. Now, instead of talking about when to expect Alabasta, let's talk about what to expect in this 2nd season now that it may end on Drum Island. While we don't have explicit confirmation on the length of Season 2, the casting description for Miss Golden Week did suggest that we would be getting 8 episodes once again. So with that in mind, I suspect Loguetown, Reverse Mountain, and Oski Peak will all get 1 episode each, leaving 2 episodes for Little Garden and potentially even 3 for Drum Island. Now, one big concern I saw for many people was that Drum Island did not feel like a natural conclusion or climax for a season. While Wapol is a fun antagonist for the arc itself, his character is contained to the arc he's introduced in and doesn't really have the obvious threads connecting him to the rest of the arcs in the saga. And while that may be true, as we saw with Season 1, the team behind the series is not afraid to rewrite and restructure the arcs to tell a compelling overarching narrative. It's important to note that while Drum may not necessarily have the biggest climax in terms of combat in the Alabasta saga, it does probably have the largest cathartic climax, much like how Arlong Park featured one of the highest emotional peaks of the East Blue saga with Nami, Drum Island does with Chopper. And it's from this point of view that you can really start to understand why this was the arc that was chosen as the end of the season. I'm sure it also helps that the resources for bringing Chopper to life are now confined to the final few episodes, but hey, that's neither here nor there. And it's certainly possible that Wapol is written to be a threat that permeates throughout the season. For example, I can totally see a world where the encounter with the Tin Plate Tyrant happens much earlier than just before the crew approaches Drum Island, and then other threads are set up to make Luffy's eventual clash with him more impactful. Wapol was displaced from his kingdom when the Blackbeard pirates attacked, so doing something like this would also service Blackbeard's presence as a threat in the story prior to his eventual debut in a later season. Who knows, maybe they even end up having him work with Baroque Works in some form. Whatever happens, I have some hopes that we'll get to see Wapol's human weapon technique in full display. This was briefly teased when we first learned of his victory over Dalton, and then silhouetted once again later on, but never ended up fully realized in the source material as Wapol was unable to get into Drum Castle's armory. There's also the possibility that this season's climax resolves much like the previous season did, with a clash against the Marines. In the source material, Smoker and Tashigi pursue the Straw Hats into the Grand Line, but don't really interact with them again until Alabasta. There is a brief moment where they intercept a call between them and Crocodile, so it would make sense for them to be able to track down the Straw Hats' location based on that and chase them to Drum Island for the finale. It would also make sense for a world government affiliated royal like Wapol to seek help from the Marines to take back his throne, similar to certain developments that we would see later on in the series. Either way, they definitely need to carve out some more space for Smoker and Tashigi in this season, especially since their uncovering of Baroque Works has kinda been contradicted already, with the Marines of the live action having been on Baroque Works' case for a while. Lastly, there's probably a decent chance that the main antagonists of the Alabasta saga wind up involved in the climax of this season as well. I'm talking, of course, about Baroque Works. As mentioned earlier, Wapol could enlist their help somehow, but it also wouldn't surprise me if they brought in Baroque Works' scope to include taking over kingdoms other than Alabasta for their resources. Perhaps they can change the reason for Wapol leaving to be because of Baroque Works rather than Blackbeard. We'll have to see. But I think it would be very interesting to utilize an actor as big as Daniel Desmalchian in a greater capacity than just his role in Little Garden. Having Mr. 3 be the overarching villain that gets built up across the season could be a lot of fun. While I don't suspect Crocodile to be present in this season, maybe outside of a brief conversation he has in Little Garden, I think it's also possible that they gave Miss All Sunday a more prevalent role throughout these arcs, perhaps even having her be the quote-unquote big bad of the season. After all, she is a very important character to the series at large, and giving her more of a presence in this season would allow future developments to carry more weight. In the source material, she debuts in the Whiskey Peak arc and is shown alongside Crocodile in the Little Garden arc, but doesn't do much until Alabasta proper, so carving out more space for her as the second in command of Baroque Works in this season would work well to set up the big boss himself for the next installment. Also, ending things off on Drum would probably mean that we don't get a slew of characters that appear solely in Alabasta, including fan favorites like Ace, but that doesn't mean we should lose all hope just yet. Ace informally debuts at the end of the Drum Island arc during a flashback, revealing that he was looking for Luffy and had visited the island not too long before the Straw Hats arrived. I can totally see this adapted as a post-credit scene or something akin to what we got at the end of Season 1 with Smoker, where we tease Ace's presence in the following season. It would be a ton of fun to play up his character as an unknown force seeking out Luffy as if he's a bounty hunter after his head, only for the big eventual reveal in the next season. Overall, I'm looking forward to what changes they'll make to spice up the story and connect the series at large. Taking the extra time to really flesh out each individual arc is a great sign, as it allows for cool things like showing us the Rumbar Pirates flashback that we first hear of in Reverse Mountain. I imagine we'll only get more stuff like this as the season comes, and I can't wait to see what we get next. Now, let's talk about some casting. We only got a handful of casting reveals this week, but there were definitely some big names present. Kicking everything off was the casting for Dr. Kureha and Dr. Hiriluk, played by the legendary Katie Sagal and Mark Hiriluk. Both of these actors have been around for quite a while and have had roles in some of your favorite shows. You may recognize Katie Sagal from her voice work, most notably for her role as Layla in Futurama. It's always cool to see well-known actors join the live action, and I'm excited to see such talented actors in these roles specifically, since they are both at the heart and core of Chopper's character and the Drum Island arc as a whole. On the following day, we got a casting that may come as a bit of a surprise to many, with Sendil Ramamurthy as Nefertari Cobra. While perhaps not as well known as Katie Sagal, he is also a very talented actor with a hand on a lot of different franchises, perhaps most well known for his role as Mohinder in the series Heroes. Now, Cobra's inclusion here may have raised some eyebrows for fans, especially after the revelation that we were not going to make it all the way to Alabasta in this season. The real reason for his inclusion in this season may be because we're technically introduced to him in a flashback to 6 years prior within Chopper's flashback. There, we see him amongst the Council of Kings at the Reverie. I'm very excited to see what they do with this scene, especially with everything we know now in the present day. Now, it's always possible that they make use of him throughout the rest of the season as well, perhaps teasing Alabasta before we formally see it. We'll just have to see. And of course, on the following day, we got our official casting for Miss Wednesday, perhaps better known by her real name, Nefertari Vivi. Even though the charade ends fairly soon after her character is introduced, it's still nice that they decided to announce her with her Brokeworks codename to preserve the surprise for any unsuspecting new fans. I'm sure this casting was not a surprise to many though, as speculation had been running rampant for months with Charitra Chandra at the center. Very cool to see that they finally panned out. Now, with both Vivi and Cobra's casting came a bit of controversy online regarding the erasure of Middle Eastern and North African roles, and I can definitely understand where people are coming from when they feel underrepresented in areas like this. While the fictional land of Alabasta was inspired by a confluence of influences and perhaps even informed by stereotypes, misconceptions, and conflations of what Oda perceived as quote-unquote desert countries, translating it all back to live action, where real people with real histories, cultures, and identities are involved, can become difficult to adequately pay respect where it's due. All I can ask is that the discussions around this remain productive, and hatred isn't aimed at people who were not responsible for certain perceived shortcomings, so please keep that in mind in the comments sections. That said, we still have a handful of characters left who have interestingly not yet been cast. Mr. 8, better known as Igaram, and his partner Miss Monday are nowhere to be seen, and even Miss Golden Week has not been revealed, despite Mr. 3 having been one of the first characters to have been cast. We also have Wapple's henchmen, with Chess and Kuro Marimo, as well as some potential fan favorites such as Bond Clay. It'll be very interesting to see if Crocodile ends up getting cast, since he does have a brief appearance during the Little Garden arc, and while I'm not convinced that we'll get Ace in full, he is teased at the end of Drum as mentioned earlier. And of course, we still have Chopper and Robin. There's been a lot of speculation around these two characters, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get some combination of the unrevealed cast next month during Netflix's Geek Week, which I'll definitely be covering on this channel. That's about it for the casting news this week. Let me know what your thoughts are on Season 2 so far in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with all things live action, and if you're new to the channel, you may enjoy my in-depth episode breakdowns of Season 1 as well. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.